continuing from the previous episode. The players who managed to maintain fellowship hugged each other, and was it someone's instigation that many people were delighted with the murder at the beginning of the challenge? But in the end, the final winners were those who kept the team together. Sun Jun turned around and noted that there were exceptions. He looked at the guy who was standing by himself covered in blood and muttering that he did nothing wrong, and that the bastard who couldn't dodge his blow was to blame for it. Sun Jun was deep in thought, saying, in other people's eyes. Sun Jun looked at his hand while Aslo stating, "Do I look like a monster?" as blood dripped from his hand. Notification. Congratulations. You have passed the 6th floor of the tower. A random draw box will be sent to your inventory as a breakthrough reward. You have received 8,000 points as a reward. A portal opened, signaling he can now move to the waiting room. Dark energy emanated from the bodies of the dead players. You have absorbed the spirit of players Lee Song-jun, Kim Jin-hoon Jin-wook, and Han Seok-jun. The protagonist put his hand out, absorbing the energy. Mastery of the unique attribute necromancy has reached 100%. The rank has increased by 1 level. Necromancy rank D. Sun Jun entered the waiting room of the 7th floor. The hero exited the portal and noticed that the achievement viewing function was activated. A list of achievements: rank S first returner, rank A none, rank B none, rank C 1, hit kill, rank D iron-blooded slasher, rank E the one who can endure the flames, ruthless killer, goblin hunter traitor, rank F none. He carefully looked at the system window and said that as he thought the first return was not a simple achievement. He pointed to the screen, deciding to take a closer look. 1 hit kill rank C. The achievement is awarded for killing an enemy with 1 hit. As a reward, the player receives Contempt for the Weak skill, Merciless Killer rank. This achievement is awarded to those who consistently kill challengers without hesitation. As a reward, the player's dexterity is increased by 1 Iron Blood Slasher, rank D. This achievement is awarded for killing 5 or more challengers in a trial. As a reward, 1,500 points are awarded. The hero thought that he really got a lot of achievements for killing. It turns out that if the player earns an achievement, he will receive various rewards such as skills points or stat increases. Sun Jun opened the inventory and a random draw box was shown. In front of you is a red box tied with a yellow ribbon from which you can randomly take out 1 item when you open it. You randomly receive 1 of the items, guaranteed F to B rank. Sun Jun looked at the bow in his hand and muttered that the reward for breaking through the 6th floor was a bit ambiguous. I shouldn't expect much since the item will be in range from F to B rank. He pulled the ribbon and decided to pull out the item so he can proceed with absorbing the souls. A bright light burst out of the box. Sun Jun looked in surprise as something jumped out of it. The small green goblin did a somersault and landed on the floor. Sun Jun looked at it in shock. He smiled and muttered what kind of creature this was, and whether it needed to be caught. The creature frowned, looking at the hero. Sun Jun dashed forward, stretching his hand out in front of him. The cute plushie dodged his palm at the last moment. The protagonist continued running forward, trying to catch his target. He pushed off the floor with explosive force in his last attempt, and he managed to grab the cute plushie. The protagonist smiled and shouted excitedly. The captured beast opened its mouth wide and screamed. Then it forcefully bit the boy's forearm with its teeth. Pain struck Sun Jun's body, causing tears to appear in his eyes. The little plushie jumped to the side. It frowned angrily and bared its fangs. The protagonist went into a furious frenzy and said that the plushie was quite cute. So he tried to be gentle with him. Jumping up, he said that now the little beast could expect no mercy. Sun Jun made several dashes, but his target jumped very high. The hero looked up and thought a moment later. The beast noticed that the boy had risen to his height after somersaulting in the air. Sun Jun looked at his target. He frowned and swung his right hand. His fist was approaching the little beast at high speed. Sun Jun struck the beast's head with incredible force, dealing a critical blow. Its head turned red with bruises. The little beast crumbled into pieces, revealing a necklace. The system congratulated Sun Jun and said that he had drawn an item corresponding to the highest rank in the random draw box. He looked at the prize and said that if it said the highest rank, it meant that his item was rank B. The necklace emitted a blue glow. The system said that it was a pendant made of forged iron, which increases the effects of metallurgy skills and swordsmanship by 7%. And when MP was used continuously as an exclusive effect, steel protection was activated. The protagonist held the pendant in his hand. He looked at it and thought about its description. He poured energy into it and decided to check the effects. The next second, energy enveloped him. The system reported that the pendant activated an exclusive effect, and as a result of which the skin began to absorb 10% of all physical damage. He exclaimed in surprise. The beams of light glinted on the surface of the pendant. He thought that this pendant had much better parameters than most of class items because it was equipped with both attack and defense, so it was truly a cheat item. Putting it on his neck, he happily said that he did not expect anything from this prank, but ended up hitting the jackpot. Suddenly, he froze in place. Noticing the messages said that all his MP was depleted, as a result of which the exclusive effect was disabled, he was confused but frowned and said that this exclusive skill absorbs mana at the speed of light. He tucked the pendant under his shirt and thought he should save mana to use the pendant at a critical moment. He looked back at the system window and decided to check the status window of the unique characteristic that was recently assigned to rank D. The system asked him if he was ready to begin the trial on the 7th floor. Sun Jun looked up, not understanding what this was, and whether there was usually a waiting period before the next challenge was issued. Standing in the middle of the room, he said that if it was possible to start the challenge a little faster, he didn't see anything wrong with it, and he wondered if the others' waiting time had disappeared as well. The system reported entering a community which difficulty was hard. The tower spirit asked if he knew that the waiting time had disappeared. Reading other people's comments, he decided that as he thought everyone could now immediately begin the challenge. He pointed his finger at the system window and thought that no one cared about the waiting time disappearing after all. No one was particularly interested in the advantage of being the first mover, and the atmosphere in the community was one of desperately wanting to return to Earth. He lowered his head and wondered if this was because most of them were low-ranking hunters looking closely at the comments. He thought that compared to the 6th floor, the manner of communication had changed drastically. He imagined the evil faces of people and thought that all these fools have now become quiet. And the next one is a personal test. So by entering into a dialogue, no one will gain anything. With a calm expression on his face, he decided that he should also be wary of the murderous fools who use the lives of their comrades as simple tools for gaining profit. And most importantly, he hit his fist into his palm and said that he needed to develop skills that would not be shaken by any obstacles. Opening the system window, he looked at the description of the unique characteristic and looked at it in surprise. Raising his eyebrows, he noticed that even more specifics were added to the description of the basic effect. Visually imagining how souls turn into enhancement magic power and a protective shell. He thought that before the main emphasis was on enhancing skills, but now souls can be used both as magical power and as a protective shell. He waved his hand, opening another window, and said that he hoped that something like an increase in the probability of obtaining a skill would appear, because anything can happen. So the ability to protect the body will never be non-essential. He pulled the sword out of the inventory, throwing it into the air. He decided to check how effective the spiritual shield was. The protagonist put his hand to the side and said that he should risk it, because even if he cut off his hand, the waiting room was equipped with a healing buff anyway. The sword quickly spun, approaching him at high speed. It approached our hero's wrist, The next second, a bright red flash lit up the area. The system reported that the spirit absorbed the damage inflicted on the user. The sword rose into the air again. Energy swirled around it. The system also added that the player's soul had disappeared, and the number of souls in possession was 3 out of 30. The protagonist looked at the damaged site. In surprise, smiling, he decided that the effectiveness exceeded all his expectations. Sun Jun looked at the number of souls in his possession and said that it was better for him not to absorb all the souls, but to always have a couple in reserve, to ensure his own protection. He opened the board, summing up the results of the trial. The system opened the player ranking table on which Sun Jun was in 4th place. Frowning slightly, he said that he had slipped to 4th place, and he wanted to be in the top 50 to be a pioneer, but it was a bit of a pity, but it was not so critical. He warmed up and said that he was already tired while checking this out the lobby, but he did not have time to delay further advancement. A portal opened in the lobby, and Sun Jun decided that it was time for him to challenge the next trial. In the darkness in front of him, the system windows began to appear, informing him that the 7th floor hard difficulty test was beginning, the theme of which would be proof, and 40 minutes were given as the remaining time. The condition of the test was to pass 3 trials within the allotted time, and the conditions for failure is the death of the applicant or the expiration of the allotted time. As a reward for a successful breakthrough, Sun Jun was guaranteed the skill of Wind's Grace, and the penalty for failure is death. The protagonist found himself in the middle of a dark corridor. He raised his eyebrows in surprise, not understanding what kind of place this was, because the atmosphere was completely different from the previous trials. Walking straight, he thought there that he literally did not feel anyone's presence, and this irritated him greatly. His hair began to flutter in the wind. A bright light flashed at the end of the corridor. A bright light quickly overtook the protagonist, transferring him to the first trial zone. Sun Jun found himself in the middle of the desert. The system demanded that he prove that he had overcome all his fears. Looking around, he recognized the surroundings. An endless sand landscape stretched out before him. Suddenly, the ground beneath his feet shook violently. The protagonist thought that everything was as he expected. In an instant, a giant sand golem rose up in front of him. Sun Jun looked up and realized that it was a sand golem. He remembered that in order to successfully pass, he had to break through 3 trials in the remaining time. And he thought this place was now a resemblance of the training trial. And this meant that during this trial, the 3 trials he had already passed would be recreated. He frowned angrily, thinking that he could defeat the sand golem with his eyes closed, and wondered if that meant he would be on the 8th floor very soon. He noticed that a large amount of sand was falling down from the golem's shoulders. The golem was getting taller and taller, leaving him at the bottom. The protagonist looked up, noticing the giant monster, and said that he didn't remember the golem being this big to begin with. A bright light was shining in the monster's eye sockets. The protagonist smirked and thought that he felt like he had been enlarged 3 times. The golem raised its arm. It swung its right hand slightly, leaning towards the hero. Sun Jun took out the sword and shield from his inventory, deciding to try and hit the empty head of the opponent. He rushed straight towards the golem's fist, deviating from the trajectory. He ran up the arm. The hero frowned confidently. He quickly climbed up the sand golem's arm, straight towards the monster's head. Finally, he made a dash and jumped away from the enemy's head. He thought that this was all very strange. While he was upside down, he looked down at the golem and thought that the golem's weak point was the core. But he couldn't find it anywhere, and perhaps the more massive the golem, the deeper the core was hidden in its body. The golem quickly turned around and looked at him. The protagonist frowned tensely. The next second, the golem's hand was quickly approaching him. The golem grabbed him in midair. Sand continued to fall from its hand. Suddenly, a blue light appeared from his palm. The hand exploded, freeing the hero. Sun Jun looked up and said that since he couldn't deal with the enemy in one blow, he should just cut him into pieces. He rushed into battle, delivering sweeping blows to the golem's body. He landed and slid across the sand. Sun Jun looked at the wounds inflicted. He smirked slightly and thought that, as expected, he was just cutting him over and over again, and he needed to find and destroy the golem's core. The golem raised its hands and screamed loudly, "AF!" The protagonist said that with his tactics, he only attracted his anger. The monster sank to the ground, resting his feet on it. His ankle sank into the sand. Sun Jun opened his mouth in surprise, looking ahead quickly, straightening up. The monster raised his foot to trample the hero. He jumped from the ground, surprised at what was happening. He looked back in fear and said that dodging its blow is not a problem, but if that sand wave falls like that. The monster's foot quickly approached the sand. Sun Jun quickly ran away from the rushing wave of sand. He lost his balance when the shock wave caught up with him. A huge sand explosion echoed in the middle of the desert dust, and sand began to settle. The golem appeared from behind. The protagonist was half buried in the sand. He nervously smiled and said that he was furious. The golem was rising from the ground. He looked at the golem. The protagonist held his sword in front of him. The golem walked towards him, reaching with its hands in front of him. Sun Jun began to emit streams of aura using 3 laceration skill. The system opened the description of the skill. The protagonist flew past the golem at incredible speed, cutting off its arm. The golem looked back at the lost limb in surprise. Sun Jun dealt a few more blows. He cut off its arm with just one attack. He immediately remembered the Dark Knight and thought that when he encountered the so-called trial invader, he was very angry. Sun Jun was smiling. He also added that now he should probably thank that knight for invading on that trial. The golem's arm began to recover. Sun Jun thought that although this golem was recovering with the help of the sand around, he should still continue to cut with his sword until its core was found. The golem bowed down, heading towards the hero, then challenged him and said that he should try to recover after the next blow. With a deft movement, he cut the golem's body several times in a flash. Sun Jun ran past the golem, cutting off all of its limbs. The golem began to recover again. Sun Jun was tired with beads of sweat dripping and off his face. He insulted the golem, after which he wondered later where the fuck is his core. Suddenly, he raised his eyebrows in surprise. Standing in front of the golem, the hero calmly asked, "When did you manage to become such a cutie?" The golem suddenly fell into a stupor. He blushed embarrassedly, hearing this for the first time that he was cute. Sun Jun noticed that the golem had shrunk its size and thought that the resources this sand, which the golem's body was made of, could not be extracted from the environment indefinitely, which is why it had apparently shrunk so much. He looked down and thought of something. A mad smile appeared on his face. He grabbed the sword and said, if it wanted to lose some more weight, the monster was enraged and opened its mouth and let out a loud roar. The opponents headed towards each other. The protagonist turned in midair, approaching the fist. He did a roundhouse kick, destroying the monster's right arm. Sun Jun clenched his teeth hard. Quickly moving forward, he rushed past the golem at incredible speed, cutting it into several pieces. The golem's fragments fell onto the sand. He moved his head, trying to roar, and quietly, having shrunk in size even more, he restored his body. The golem growled and looked up. The hero was shocked as he found the core standing in place. He looked at the crystal on the monster's back and thought that the body was covered in a thick layer of sand, so it was extremely difficult to reach forward, and added that he thought about 10 minutes had passed and there were only 40 minutes to complete the 7th floor trial, and it would probably be better to speed this up. Suddenly, he noticed a fist approaching quickly. At the last moment, the protagonist dodged, changing its trajectory. He continued to dodge the golem's attacks, saying that after going on a diet, you became much more agile. He rushed behind the golem and said that although he wanted to play with it longer, he did not have time for this anymore. A moment later, the hero pierced the monster's core. The golem opened its mouth and let out a scream. The core shattered into several pieces. The system notified the hero, saying that he had proven himself and that he overcome his fear. The first trial has successfully been completed. The golem's body began to crumble to the ground. A bright flash appeared in the air. The protagonist looked around in surprise, noticing the disappearance of the surrounding space. Puzzled, he thought that this was excellent. He stretched out his hand and pulled the golem's spirit along with him. The flow of the soul was moving to his palm. Sun Jun tried not to let go. A notification appeared above his palm that the absorption had failed. Beads of sweat dripped from his face while in confusion, and said that the increase in skill had also flown down the drain. The system reported, "You are now entering the second trial." Sun Jun found himself in the middle of a burning location and his body healed in a green light. A monster's corpse was lying a bit away from him. The system demanded proof that he had become wiser. He frowned deeply, recognizing the surroundings. The orc village was burning outside, and their corpses were laying everywhere. The previous trials he completed in the beginning were happening again. Sun Jun lifted the curtain and went outside. The next second, he raised his eyebrows in surprise, and he noticed that the orc was bowing down in front of his dead comrade and watching what was happening. He thought that these were orc rangers, and that during the trial on the second floor, he destroyed the orc village, so now the subsequent events were unfolding right in front of his eyes. The orc touched the artery on the neck of his dead comrade. He sternly looked up at the protagonist, and the orc looked closely with anger, then let out a dull sound. His eyes were bloodshot with red aura. He rose to his feet and let out a loud roar. The protagonist realized that he was going berserk again, a phenomenon often observed in monsters overcome by anger. He lowered his hands and noted that an orc in a berserk state is no longer a normal monster. He was very unlucky. The orcs rushed to attack with battle cries echoing. They were quickly approaching the protagonist. He frowned sternly and said that it's pretty obvious the monsters are acting out in pain of losing a family member. The system reported the activation of the instant acceleration skill and the triple laceration skill. Sun Jun leaped forward with explosive force and said that they should not do this, at least in front of him. The orc fell to his knees. The commander of this squad was kneeling in front of the hero, quietly muttering. The orc was breathing heavily, keeping its head down. The bodies of its comrades were lying everywhere. Next to it, the protagonist looked at him with disdain and asked the monster if it felt disgusting because he was standing there and just watching his family die, unable to do anything. The orc went berserk again. He rose to his feet and swung his right hand. Sun Jun dodged his attack. Energy flashed in his pupils with a quick dash. The hero decapitated his opponent's head swiftly. Then he exhaled heavily. The system reported that he had proven that he had become wiser, thus completing the second trial. Looking back, the protagonist thought that this time he will not hesitate. He extended his hand and began to collect all the souls nearby. The next moment, he was being pulled into the portal again. The system reported the successful absorption of all the orc's souls, and as a result of which, the mastery was increased by 6%, and the number of souls rose to 19 out of 30. The hero clenched his fist with a happy smile. The system issued a notification that the mastery of the hunter's dagger skill had reached 100%, so the skill had increased to D rank. Also, the instant acceleration skill had risen 1 sub-rank higher. The system notified him of entering the third trial zone, where he must prove that he had overcome all doubts. Sun Jun looked ahead with beads of sweat and said that this time I will make it through this trial. He found himself standing on a long path in the middle of the water with a surprised expression. He realized that this was the battle platform of the 6th floor. He turned his head and said that since the previous zones were reconstructions of the 1st and 2nd floors, he thought there would be a double. From the 3rd floor, he remembered the previous trial and said that he was not surprised if such an ignorant trial was labeled as wisdom, and he was really going. If he hoped to see at least some common sense in the trial, Tower Sunjun opened his inventory and took a life potion. With a slight movement, he opened the bottle. He tipped the bottle over and drank the contents. The potion worked, healing him instantly. He closely looked at the bottle in his hand, throwing it into the ocean. He said that he was littering a little. In the trial tower, a moment later, a giant wave rose behind him. Powerful splashes of water lifted up the concrete slabs of the path. Hero frowned in surprise and said that he only threw a tiny bottle. The system reported the activation of the killer's cloak, increasing movement speed by 15% with the remaining time 59 seconds. He rushed away from the approaching waves. He frowned and thought that the trial that had been played so far were repeating the existing rules, which meant that in order to pass this trial, he needed to find and occupy the red tile of the stronghold. The rushing waves rose up, creating different shapes. The protagonist also added that until he found the tile, he should not touch this water under any circumstances. Running further and further, he decided that his speed was higher because the waves could not catch up to him. Frowning in surprise, he decided that this was great because he had to move in the same direction. A powerful splash of water threw the tile up from under Sunjun's feet, throwing him into the air. Now falling down, he touched the water, as a result of which his strength, agility, and endurance were reduced by 10 points. And the duration of the penalty was equal to 2 minutes and 59 seconds. The water continued to throw up concrete slabs. Sunjun thought that he even had an idea that the tiles would remain in the same order. Being in the air, he added that it was a kind of hope, that there was at least some common sense in the trial tower. He gritted his teeth and used instant acceleration, leaning against the slab. He pushed off powerfully with quick movements. He bounced off the next 2 slabs. The protagonist gritted his teeth and said that he never expected he could die in such a place. He continued to push off the slabs on his way, running further and further. Noticing a red pad, he headed towards it, looking at his target. He thought it was the red slab of the stronghold. Sunjun gritted his teeth and thought that soon, finally, this annoying test would end. The water's surface swirled into a whirlpool. Several streams of water rose into the air all at once in order to hinder him. The water spun like a hurricane and flew over him. The hero said that now the trial tower decided to go completely crazy. He leaped forward and headed towards the red plate. Slightly smiling, he realized that there was very little left. The twirling water was quickly heading after him. The hero noticed the danger from behind. A powerful blow of the water hit him right in the back. Sunjun's vision clouded over as the water absorbed him. Scarlet energy flared behind him. Streams of dark aura spread through the air. The system reported that the soul absorbed the damage done to the user, as a result of which one of the orc souls was destroyed. More and more energy was growing rapidly. Suddenly, it stopped the flow of water. Another orc soul disappeared. Sunjun looked back and thought that he clearly felt the shock wave, but right before the blow could cause him any damage, the shield blocked it. The hero did a somersault in the air and flew to the side, landing on the tile. He quickly ran forward. The streams of water went after him when suddenly the remaining time was over. The water froze in place, and the exclusive effect of the killer cloak has been deactivated. Sunjun frowned in confusion and thought that now he had no mana left, and if the instant acceleration failed, then it would be the end for him. He gathered scarlet energy in his palm. The hero threw the energy ball into his mouth, forcing himself to swallow it. He frowned slightly, and aura began to emanate from his chest into the dark. The system reported that he needed to replenish his magic power using the soul of the orc. Sun Jun thought that this was great, and that his strength had returned. The streams of water swirled around, continuing to move. Sun Jun quickly ran away from it. He looked at the red tile and thought that there was very little time left. Suddenly, a column of water burst up in front of his face. He opened his mouth in surprise and cursed the streams of water, quickly caught up with him while he stood still. With both of his arms crossed, he made a dash forward, wanting to take the risk. Sun Jun entered the stream. His silhouette began to blur under the streams of water. He broke free from the other side, exhaling heavily. The system reported that the orc spirit had been destroyed. Sun Jun was in the air, right above the waves of water flying downward upside down. He took a deep breath. Sun Jun tried to regroup himself and screamed loudly. He looked at the tile in fear, screaming shrilly. He was quickly approaching the red tile. After a little while, Sun Jun hit the concrete with incredible force. A few orc souls disappeared. He had 12 units left. A large amount of dust rose in the air. The dust cleared, and Sun Jun was laying in the rubble on the surface. He opened his eyes in surprise, noticing something swirling waves hung right above, ready to hit him. Sun Jun was puzzled. The system reported that he had proven that he had overcome his doubts. As a result of something, these trials were successfully completed. The streams began to lose its shape, and a huge amount of water fell on him. Being wet, he squinted his eyes and thought that this was a crazy-ass trial and that it was completed, but for some reason, he had to suffer until the last second. Suddenly, system notifications appeared, reporting that he had overcome the 7th floor of the Ryle Tower, and as a reward for breaking through the skill, Wind's Grace was obtained. 15,000 points were awarded and speed boots were sent to his inventory, after which the system reported that he was going to the waiting room. The protagonist headed into the portal. The spatial gate emitted a light blue light. Then Sun Jun went inside to the waiting room. He threw off his jacket, slightly lowering his head. He remembered the past trial. The protagonist frowned deeply and realized that he was so close to death. He bit his bottom lip and thought that in his current situation he was a little anxious to go to the 8th floor right away, because he did not think that he would continue to be so lucky in the future. Suddenly he raised his head and felt his body shaking. The system windows opened in front of him, reporting that the number of applicants who passed the trials on the 7th floor exceeded 1,000 people, so the expansion of the system began. The skill store was opened, and a junction was created in the trial, as a result of which a permanent return was possible and the floor invading system was activated. Looking at all of these messages, he thought that this was all what was expected. You are a challenger that has been appointed as a pioneer on all the previous floors, as a result of which he was entitled to select the halo. The protagonist imagined a dark yet golden silhouette of a man with bright rays of light coming from him, and thought that the halo was a great benefit to have and that you can get it from being appointed a pioneer in all floors. He raised his eyebrows in surprise when he saw the system notification that the halo affected the unique characteristics and skills of the hero. So he had to choose wisely. The protagonist wondered later, had he ever given the tower such advice, because it must mean that the halo was very important. The system gave him a choice of 3 halos: Ruler, Hunter, and Monk. Sun Jun crossed his arms looking at this and said that he needed to read the description first. He opened the description of the ruler's halo, which said this is a halo that changes based on the person's performance. In fact, it is closer to the universal type than the specialized type, and is closely related to the unique characteristics of the applicant. The potential is greatly increased for abilities such as combat growth, support, and creation. And the unique strength of skills is the synthesis of skills. So this is the most suitable halo for Sun Jun. The hero raised his eyebrows in surprise and said that it affects all skills, and even the unique characteristic. Reading it closely at the last lines, he thought that the tower was openly saying that this is the most suited halo for him. He pointed his finger at the system window and said that he needed to look at the other options also. The system opened the description of the hunter's halo, which said that anyone can easily adapt to this halo. It's closely related to improving characteristics and skills, and the effect of the halo greatly increases the level of skill and stats. The unique authority is to increase the level, and this halo is also perfect for the current challenger. Sun Jun looked at the writing with distrust and was surprised that this choice was also not a bad one. He opened the description of the monk's halo. The system said that this is a halo that is greatly influenced by talent and perseverance, and the longer you invest your time, the stronger he will become. But this takes time and talent. And if a person does not have talent, all efforts may be useless. The unique authority of the halo is the path of training, and this halo is not recommended for the current challenger. He waved his hands, dividing the system window into 3, and said that this halo is definitely not for him, so he needs to make a choice in favor of one of the remaining 2. So he lowered his hand and decided to choose it. He pointed his finger at the system window. Golden rays of light appeared behind him. The system reported that he had chosen ruler, and the unique effect of the ruler's halo launched the evolution of unique traits. The system showed him the possibility of developing into the field of necromancy and said that he could begin to summon undead, or as a result, be able to absorb souls to revive powerful skeletons. Then it showed him in the form of a magic swordsman and said that his talent for the sword and magic would increase, and the ability to acquire the corresponding skills would increase 3-fold. The system also showed him in the form of a blacksmith and said that he could also go the way of the creator, and in this case, the talent for creating items would increase, and the ability to acquire skills related to production would increase 3-fold. The protagonist looked at these options in surprise. He moved his finger to the system window. They say that he has nothing to even think about. He looked closely at the system windows, reporting that the summoner attribute had been added to the unique characteristics of necromancy. Due to this, some effects were modified and new detailed effects were added. Then the unique ability of skill synthesis was created. The scarlet energy swirled around and began to gather into Sun Jun's chest. The system opened the status window. The hero stepped onto the floor, happy with the end result. He looked down as the energy continued to gather in his chest and thought that the skill was finally created. Sun Jun pointed his finger at the system window, opening the description of the unique authority skill synthesis, the effect of which allows you to select 2 desired skills and combine them. And if the skill levels differ during the use of the effect, the skill of the higher rank becomes the center of the synthesis. Sun Jun opened his mouth in surprise and thought that by combining useless skills, he can create something new. The thought flashed through his mind that this was freaking awesome. The system asked him to look at the list of skills and select the material to create the synthesis from the skills currently available. Sun Jun looked at the list of his abilities and thought about what to combine. He touched his chin and began to search for skills he does not use often. He chose the skill of extinction of the weak and battle continuation. The system asked him if he wanted to continue. Sun Jun pressed the button and decided to continue the synthesis window, and the golden light brightly lit the system up and reported the completion of the skill synthesis. The bright light illuminated Sun Jun's face as he looked in surprise. The skill of forceful breakthrough was created. The protagonist looked at the description of the skill in surprise. The system reported that the skill allows you to break through unknown forms of restriction, such as skills and unique characteristics, but the user's magic must be higher than the level of magic that's used on the user. Sun Jun could not understand how this happened. He thought that he combined 2 lower skills and that he expected to get an E rank skill but got a D rank instead. He smiled happily and decided that this was a mind-blowing skill. He pointed his finger to the system window, saying, "Let's try this again." The system asked him to select the material to synthesize again. The hero chose Ranger Knowledge and Fire Resistance. He then agreed to continue the synthesization. The system window lit up brightly again, and that the skill synthesization was now complete. Sun Jun smiled eagerly, expecting a new result. The skill, Strengthened Eyes, was created, which allowed one to be able to see even with limited visibility. The protagonist fell into a stupor and said that it turns out the created skill now was only one step higher than those chosen for synthesis. He closely thought about what the reason for this was. He mentally imagined the two previous skills and thought that they went well together. Then he imagined the two skills opposite each other this time, and thought that their combination was not the best from a first glance. It was clear they were completely incompatible with each other. He fell heavily onto the bed, looking at the ceiling, feeling relieved. He said that he had come a long way from holding the status of a pioneer to receiving the reward of the halo. But for some reason, he felt a little strange lying on the bed. He wondered if he really achieved everything through his own efforts, or if he had just gotten lucky. With his unique characteristic, he was silent for a second. He got up and decided that he couldn't lie around doing nothing. He thought about all sorts of nonsense, because it would be much better if he checked the reward he had received. He looked at the description of the skill Wind's Grace, the effect of which allowed him to increase all speeds by 10%. The system reported that this skill could be stacked up to 7 times. However, when the limit was reached, a 24-hour cooldown would automatically be activated. Looking more closely at the description, he said that increasing all speeds, this is amazing. And he will also be able to stack this skill 7 times, which means that he would be able to increase any speed by 70%. Sun Jun imagined himself running forward at an incredible speed. The protagonist imagined a bright glow and thought that this skill does not consume mana at all. Sitting on the bed, he said with a smile, that the Wind's Grace is essentially a skill that has no downsides. He opened his inventory and looked at the boots. He put on his new boots, then looked at it with a smile. The system reported that these are speed boots that increase attack speed by 3% and movement speed by 5%. The protagonist said that all the rewards on the 7th floor are related to speed, and he is incredibly happy with this arrangement. Suddenly, the system reported that the skill store was entered and that it's compiling a list of skills available for purchase. Sun Jun looked at the list and said that, contrary to his expectations, the quality of the store leaves much to be desired, after which he thought that in addition to this, prices are also incredibly high. He shook his head thinking, sheesh, so fucking expensive having to pay 8,000 for an instant boost. He pressed the buy button and said that he really needed a skill related to magic. The hero imagined coins falling while looking at the messages that he had purchased the magic circuit skill, as a result of which 15,000 points were deducted from his account, and he also bought magic resistance for 12,000 points. The system reported that the magic resistance skill grants an effect due to which resistance to magic is created throughout the body. Resistance to other people's mana is increased, but if he does not have the mana circuit skill, the effect is significantly reduced. He recalled the past battle and thought that now that he has the resilience skill, he will not be caught off guard by something like the unique characteristic of heart fusion, which had caused him TP have a hard time in the past. He opened the description of the magic chain skill and his body began to release mana. Sun Jun gritted his teeth, feeling the heat of the scarlet energy throughout his body. He began to glow brighter and hotter, emitting powerful streams of energy. The bedsheets swayed strongly in the air, then slowly stopped. Sun Jun lowered his feet to the floor, getting up from the bed. He said that his body felt so light he took a few steps forward. He stopped in the middle of the room. Then he lowered his gaze. The protagonist raised his right leg, which was covered in mana. A moment later, he slammed it onto the ground, creating a powerful shock wave. Without taking his eyes off what was happening, he was very surprised. The floor under his foot shattered. Sun Jun thought that the mana used randomly formed a chain and strengthened his physical abilities. He smiled, clenching his fist, and was happy that he made a good purchase. The hero opened the system window, The system reported that he could use the souls of the deceased to resurrect a corpse nearby, and that at the time of resurrection, the level of the dead would be proportional to the quality and quantity of souls absorbed. The protagonist said that he was curious about this new ability to summon the dead. He waved off the notification window and said that it would be better for him to familiarize himself with it in actual battle. He placed his hands on his waist and exhaled heavily. He pressed his lips together and considered what decision he should make. The hero frowned sternly and said he should think about whether to challenge the next floor now or return to Earth. Hunter Lee was looking at his phone, nervously tapping his feet on the ground, and was indignant at the fact that there was no response. Suddenly, he noticed that someone had approached him. A plump man with his team approached him and asked the guy if he was able to gather a team. They all were near a blue giant gate. The plump man also said that he should hand over the permission to enter the gate. With a malicious grin, he added that if the raid in the dungeon did not begin after the specified time, the right to enter would be automatically expire, so he could just take the appropriate fee and hand the pass over to them. The guy frowned tensely, recognizing the guys who had approached him are low-life bastards. He raised his head excitedly and said that he had no intention of handing over his pass to anyone. The men immediately insulted him. The plump man grabbed his head and said with a smile that there were a lot of hunters in the park, but no one was eager to join his team. With an excited smile, he mockingly said that he was only an E-rank hunter. Lee was stunned when he heard the question of whether he thought anyone would want to be on the same team with trash like him. The plump man, along with his team, looked at the guy ominously and taunting the guy. The surrounding people discussed how he was being too cheeky but telling the honest truth. Suddenly, everyone froze in place when someone asked if the team was still recruiting. Sun Jun walked through the crowd. He held out his ID and introduced himself, frowning. Sun Jun asked if this was enough to join the team. Hunter Lee was saddened, then stood up from the bench, while Sun Jun said that he completely satisfied all the requirements. The plump man put his hand on Sun Jun's shoulder and asked if he didn't see the line of people waiting, or if he didn't understand what was going on at all. The protagonist let out a sigh and smiled. The plump man got angry when he heard the words that if he was unhappy with something, he should apply for the Lee Chan's team. The man was very indignant about this. Suddenly, Sun Jun became completely serious and threateningly told the man to take his fucking hand off his shoulder right now before I break it. Sun Jun immediately released his red aura, surprising everyone around him. The man turned pale and immediately removed his hand from his shoulder. Beads of sweat dripped from his face in surprise, wondering what kind of energy this was and if he really was a C-rank hunter like himself. The allies of the man admired this energy, smiling wide, thinking that it was released by their captain. The man smiled nervously and thought that this was not his energy at all. He put his hand to his mouth awkwardly, said that since there were representatives from the Hunters Association around, he would let it slide this time. As he walked away, he said that the boy was just lucky. Hunter Lee grabbed his head and wondered why everything was going wrong from the start. He stopped pouting, then looked up at our hero in surprise. Sun Jun called him by name. They both were standing opposite each other. Sun Jun said that judging by the situation, he felt like he wouldn't be able to find anyone else to join his team. So why don't we just enter the blue gate? Hunter Lee pointed at himself with a shocked face and asked if he wanted to go in a two-man team. They both entered the gate. Hunter Lee held his sword and quickly looked around, saying that they actually entered. The hero looked back at Lee and said that he didn't need to worry about anything at all, since I could deal with most of the D-rank monsters. Lee looked at Sun Jun in surprise. He raised his hand while looking at our hero and asked if he had said before that it was his first time in a dungeon. Sun Jun confirmed it and thought that in essence the trial tower and dungeons were the same thing. Lee frowned and said that at first glance his words might seem tactless to him, but their lives were at stake, so he should listen to him carefully. Sun Jun looked at him silently while Lee asked him who he thought had the highest mortality rate in the dungeon, an E-rank hunter or a C-rank hunter. Lee frowned and said that at first glance it might seem like the E-rank hunter would be the one most likely to die, but in reality, C-rank hunters had a higher mortality rate. He imagined two fighters and said that E-rank hunters were extremely cautious because they knew they were pathetically weak, while hunters of a higher rank were overconfident in their strength. He then imagined the spears killing the second hunter and said that the fatality rate was extremely high for C ranks. Lee then imagined them getting into a car accident and said that the same could be said about driving, since the more confident the driver was, the higher the chance of getting into an accident. He lowered his head and said that a place called a dungeon was much more dangerous than it all. Lee raised his hand and added that since Sun Jun risked entering the dungeon without a tank and a healer, he became even more worried about this overconfidence he has. Sun Jun replied that there was logic in those words. The man looked at his face. Then Lee added that although he was an E-rank hunter, he had a lot of experience visiting dungeons, so he could take on the role of leader of this group. Sun Jun frowned slightly and thought that he also wanted to be the leader. Lee bowed after hearing the agreement and thanked him for understanding. Then said that he was doing this for everyone's safety, so he hoped his offer did not spoil anyone's mood. His words echoed throughout the cave, saying we needed to continue on our way. Lee decided to trust him suddenly. A lizard man appeared in front of them. Lee tensely clenched his teeth and said that these monsters are known for skillfully using various types of weapons, so they were very unlucky that he was their opponent. He stood in front of the lizard man while holding his sword with both hands and said that for starters he would draw all the attention of this monster to himself, and our hero would attack him immediately on signal. As soon as the lizard man opened its back, Sun Jun watched what was happening, thinking that he needed to see how an experienced hunter would deal with this situation. The lizard man opened his mouth and rushed into battle. Lee smirked tensely and ran towards the monster. Suddenly, they stopped a few meters away from each other. Lee began to swing the blade in various directions. He continued to strike the air, but then he suddenly realized what was happening. Watching the captain, he thought that they were now measuring strength. Sun Jun frowned and added that a temporary return to Earth takes only 3 days, and now he has to lose precious time because of some insignificant monster. Lee suddenly looked back at our hero. Sun Jun stepped forward and apologized because he was forced to intervene. Lee tried to stop him, saying that it could be very dangerous. Our hero jumped up using instant acceleration. A moment later, he cut the lizard into many pieces. Lee looked in shock, seeing what happened. Sun Jun looked at the parts of the monster and said that he had to intervene because he was in a hurry. Lee looked down at the corpse and said that he understood everything perfectly because he could have his own reasons for this. Sun Jun also said that he would like to make a suggestion. Would it be all right to say it? In a silly way. Lee immediately nodded and asked to tell everything as it is. Sun Jun pointed at himself and asked him to take the lead. A crowd of lizard men rushed forward, shouting loudly, "Grrr!" Our hero rushed past them, cutting down several lizard men. He looked onward, sensing this. The monsters rushed to attack, but Sun Jun jumped into the air, dodging all of their attacks. Sun Jun pierced his blade into the back one of the monsters. Lee was in shock and watched in surprise. He looked at the concentrated face of our hero and thought that this was just a one-sided massacre. The lizardmen struck again, but missed and cut off the head of his comrade. Sun Jun struck again with a deft movement of his blade, decapitating the lizard man's head. Beads of sweat ran down Lee's face, while he watched everything with his mouth wide open, thinking that he probably got to witness the battle of an SS-ranked hunter who would shake up the freaking world in the future. The protagonist plunged his blade into the body of one of the lizards. He took out a shiny green mana-filled crystal. Lee looked back at Sun Jun and said that other than acting as a porter, he was of no use, and he apologized and yelled that one of the monster is approaching you from behind at a fast speed, while he was discussing with him how much profit each would get. Sun Jun slightly tilted his head, letting the sword pass by. He turned around and swung his left hand with a single blow, thrusting the beast up in the air, and then he smashed its head against the ceiling of the cave. Rock fragments fell next to our hero. Lee grabbed his head, watching in horror. The entire cave was covered in blood. Sun Jun said that they needed to discuss this outside because if they let their guard down, they could end up in a horrible situation. He brushed the blood off. Then Lee apologized to him. Sun Jun began to absorb the souls of the lizardmen and thought that he needed to pretend to yawn and absorb all the souls. At this time, there was an increase of 0.7%, and that with D-class monsters, he would be increasing the mastery of his unique characteristic for a very long time. Suddenly, a scarlet gate appeared. They both looked forward, and Lee thought that only the two of them they were able to reach the scarlet gate leading to the boss room. Lee smiled with beads of sweat and thought that he did not even have any thoughts about completing the raid on the boss, or to be more precise. From the very beginning, he thought it would be a great success if they overcome at least half of the dungeon. He looked at Sun Jun from behind and added that he thought the man in front of him was quite capable of clearing this dungeon completely. Sun Jun looked back and asked if Lee was okay with this arrangement if they were to invade the boss's room. Now Lee answered of course and said, "Don't you think you should take a break for a while?" Sun Jun reassured him, saying that there was no need for that because he was perfectly fine. A man's voice was heard near the portal, and they agreed to enter the portal. They found themselves in front of a giant lizard man, sitting on a throne made of bones. The monster rested his hands on the throne. Lee said that as he had predicted, the king of the lizards was waiting for them in this place. Lee looked at him in shock, then asked what he was going to do. Sun Jun asked for some time to think. Lee frowned anxiously and asked if Sun Jun wanted to say that he had no clear plan of action. The monster immediately jumped up from his place. Sun Jun smiled, awaiting the battle, and said that it happened just in time. The monster was approaching them at an incredible speed. Sun Jun's eyes widened in surprise. He made several dashes back, dodging the spear strikes. Dodging another blow, he thought that this monster was very fast. And surprisingly, considering his size, Sun Jun frowned and looked up at his opponent. The next second, he found himself behind the lizard. Sun Jun swung his blade forward and thought it was not fast enough for him to match the speed of this beast. The Lizard King attacked him, with its tail hitting Sun Jun's side of his body. The Lizard King threw Sun Jun to the end of the cave like some rag doll. Lee grabbed his head and screamed Sun Jun's name in fear. The hero kicked away a block of stone. Scarlet energy swirled around his body. The system reported that the soul had absorbed the damage inflicted on the user. Sun Jun smiled and said that this is a great way to test out my new skills. Lee said with tears in his eyes that he thought you were dead. The beast looked at the enemy with an angry expression. Sun Jun climbed out from rubble and asked the enemy what the hell happened, and if he cared that not a single stone was left of his throne. The Lizard King's throne was heavily damaged. Sun Jun asked if he thought it was an ominous omen. The ground trembled before they even saw him. Air thickening, lights flickering as if the world itself refused to witness what was coming. The boss planted both feet on the shattered floor, releasing a sinister magenta aura that rippled through the air like a storm of venom and fire. Both hunters froze, their lungs seized, their instincts screaming. The weight of that power pressed down on them like a mountain. It wasn't just energy, it was dominance made visible, a presence that dared them to breathe. He released a powerful beam from its mouth. Sun Jun's limbs were immediately shackled by chains, as he was affected by the skill of a slow wave, and as a result of which his speed was reduced by 25%. A green sphere cut off the chain. Sun Jun activated a forceful breakthrough. A pleasant lime green colored energy swirled around his body. The system announced all effects of slowness from all movement was negated. The beast opened its mouth in surprise. Noticing something, Sun Jun exhaled and thought the skill was the result of synthesis. So he had some doubts about it, but the effectiveness was high. Suddenly the monster turned his gaze to the side, and a quiet groan was heard in the cave. Lee was bound with chains, fell to his hands and knees, and said that his body did not obey him. He was scared, but looked at his ally and asked for help. The monster looked at him and growled. Lee frowned in surprise, realizing what was about to happen. The lizard turned around and ran towards the man. Beads of sweat fell from Sun Jun's face, staring at the enemy in shock. The monster rushed towards Lee, seeing that he's the weaker one, all alone. The protagonist gritted his teeth, noting he needs to catch up somehow, and shouted that he was the boss's rival. Sun Jun was moving at a high speed. He tried to catch up with the lizard. Looking at the monster from behind, he thought that the distance was too great. The protagonist raised his eyebrows in surprise. His pupils turned scarlet, and he used the summoning of the dead. Two skeleton warriors appeared right in front of the monster and Lee. They opened their mouths and rushed to attack the dungeon boss, defeated them without much trouble. Sun Jun watched the bones fall and thought they were not strong enough to stop such a giant, but nevertheless he was able to get a second with their help, having summed up the skill of Wind's Grace by 60%. He chopped the monster into several pieces and thought that this second saved Lee's life. The dungeon boss face froze with an open mouth. The system announced his death. Streams of scarlet energy gathered in one point. The system reported that Sun Jun used the absorption of the spirit of the Lizard King to permanently increase stats, and as a result of which his strength, agility, endurance mana, and durability were increased by different amounts of points. Sun Jun looked at his chest in surprise. The system also reported the absorption of one of the Lizard King's skills, the Spiritual Eye. The rep yawned widely. He looked in front of him and said that except for the fact that all three gates appeared at the same time for power, nothing special happened. He looked back at his subordinate and asked if he noticed anything unusual. The rep said, "No, nothing." Team leader. The leader looking at the gate, thinking that everything was as usual. Because after the hunters of the first squad made a partial raid in the open gate and went outside, the attacking team of the Hunter Association would have to break into the dungeon and finish off the boss. Sitting down on the back of the bench, he said that it seemed like everyone was in the same Hunter Association, but he did not understand why. Only their team did not have a commission fee, after which he insulted the members of the attacking team and said that he was very jealous. Suddenly his eyes sparkled with anticipation of monetary payment. The rep said that if the advanced squad completely cleared the gates in the first quarter, then their troll team would be able to get their share. He sadly lowered his eyebrows, smiling slightly. He thought that this would only be possible with an A-rank hunter, and wondered if there was even one high-class hunter who would pull off such a crazy stunt. Lee and Sun Jun appeared from the portal. The leader looked back, hearing the shout that the advanced party of the third gate had finished clearing it. The leader was surprised that it was so fast. The leader tried to accompany the guy. The leader was surprised that they went to raid the dungeon with only the two of them, meaning that this group couldn't even get halfway there suddenly. He raised his eyebrows in surprise, noticing something strange. The gate behind them began to disappear. He opened his mouth in shock, thinking that the gate had become colorless. The leader smiled widely and finished his thought by saying that the boss's room had been completely cleared. Stumbling, he ran towards the guy. He was breathing heavily, then asked the protagonist if they had really cleared the dungeon completely. Sun Jun asked him who he was to ask such questions. The leader adjusted his suit nervously and said with a smile that he forgot to introduce himself, after which he gave his name and said that he was the leader of the Gatel control group from the Hunters Association, who had arrived in this place to monitor the gates that had suddenly appeared in this park. Lee intervened in the conversation and asked if they had arrived later, that they wanted to buy the rights to occupy the gate. The man confirmed this and said that he wanted to make an offer to the two of them. He raised his eyebrows in surprise when he heard the words that Lee was not the one who had the right to make decisions in this matter. The leader was very surprised when he was told that the protagonist had captured this dungeon alone. He recoiled and asked in shock if he really did the cleanup alone, since that meant he was an A-rank hunter. Sun Jun interrupted him, saying that he was a C-rank hunter, and he thought that it was not the most important thing right now, after which the leader asked him to get closer to the point. He frowned and asked how much he wanted to buy the rights to occupy the gate, for after which he thought that if it became known that he came from the trial tower, then it would add unnecessary problems. The leader coughed and said that if we return to the main view of the conversation, then their team wants to propose something. Sun Jun frowned in surprise, hearing the words he said that they wanted to buy the right to occupy the portal from them for 1.2 billion. The scene shifts to huge stacks of books falling on the table. The girl sat down, breathing heavily on them, and said that it was very hard for her because after returning from the tower, all she did was work like a racehorse. Suddenly, she noticed something. She picked up the phone and wondered who was calling her at such a late hour. She looked at her phone screen in surprise a bit earlier. She looked over her left shoulder. The lady looked at the nameplate with the team leader's name. She remembered standing in front of three men who said that, without a doubt, this incident would lead to revolutionary changes, as if in court. And then she thought that everyone at the top was really worried. She held her head and said that even if the applicants were hiding their identities, she still didn't think it would be so difficult to win them over. She looked down, putting her hand on her head. She added that she didn't even manage to recruit 10 people at all, and all of these applicants were low-level hunters, so it was not enough to satisfy top management. She looked out the window and said that if she thought about it, she had no idea what Sun Jun was doing. Remembering how he cut down the goblins in a split second, and then thought that he was incredibly strong, that it would not be an exaggeration to say that he cleared the 4th floor alone. She touched the glass window and regretted that she did not propose to him right away. Suddenly, she was distracted by a notification on her phone. She picked it up and wondered who was calling her at such a late hour. The lovely lady raised her eyebrows in surprise, looking at the phone screen. Sun Jun texted her and asked if they could meet up if she already returned. Sun Jun's balance was 1,291,600,001. Sun Jun couldn't believe the phone screen staring at the sum. OMG? This is real? He's truly sitting in a cafe saying that he felt amazing. When suddenly a golden doorbell rang. Beads of sweat dripped from the lady's face and flew inside the cafe. She noticed Sun Jun waving his hand at her. The lady grabbed her head, a bit shy. Approaching the table, Sun Jun thought, did she ran with all her might here? Sitting opposite of him, she said that he did not even answer her message. Our hero blushed, hearing these words, that she waited for him to answer for a very long time. Beads of sweat formed, then Sun Jun apologized, after which he said he never read it because he had other things to deal with. Smiling, she pointed at him with her fingers and said that then he should treat her to a cup of coffee and cheesecake. Deal? Sun Jun replied that she could order whatever she wanted. A little while later, a cup of coffee appeared on the table by the waiter. They both sat opposite each other. The lady asked if he was going to climb to the top floors of the trial tower. Sun Jun replied that he was going to continue climbing in the tower, to be honest. He contacted her because he had a request to ask. He looked deep into her beautiful eyes and said that he needed to join a guild so that he could raid dungeons as he pleased during his short return from the trial tower, but he had a few conditions. He imagined various hunters and said that the first condition was the right to refuse a summon to the guild. Then he imagined the trial tower and added that the second condition was not to interfere with his personal affairs inside the tower, and the third was authority to use the guild's dungeons at any time. Sun Jun also asked if there was a guild that would be willing to satisfy all of these conditions. He frowned slightly and wondered if the atmosphere had changed, and if he had overdone it. He suddenly flinched when he heard his name. The lady tilted her head and said that the conditions he proposed were absolutely impossible to fulfill since, from the guild's point of view, they did not gain anything. She touched his hand, interrupting his words about how he had probably asked for too much. She stood up and looked him in the eyes as if they were ready for marriage, bare fingers intertwined. The lady said that he could join her white-silver guild. He raised his eyebrows in surprise, hearing the words that she would make these impossible conditions possible. The protagonist was lying on the roof of the bus. Recalling the past conversation, his hair fluttered in the wind. Sun Jun said that from raiding the dungeon to the right to occupy and plus joining the guild yesterday, he lived his life productively. Looking up at the moonlit sky, he said that to join the guild, there was one task left to complete. He suddenly plunged into the memories of the past conversation. The lady said that he should clear a C-rank dungeon alone because he should demonstrate his abilities, so that it would be easier for her to convince the higher-ups, because the privilege of free use of the guild dungeons is not available to everyone. Sun Jun looked deep into her eyes and thought that her words meant that not everyone could bathe in cream, aka money. Using the White Guild dungeon, it had to be at least a rising star or a hunter who had high hopes. He frowned and said that they could prepare everything necessary for the cleanup. They shook each other's hand. The lady added that she would make sure that he would never regret his decision. Sitting and watching the sun rise, he said that as a warm-up, he thought it would be worthwhile to start jogging from this place. He rested his hand on the roof of the bus. Rising to his feet, he bowed his head, then looked up and made a powerful dash forward. People on the sidewalk noticed something flying above them at a high speed. Hyan came to the opened gate. Then she smiled and said that she came to confirm the reservation for the raid on the dungeon, which takes place in an hour from now. The man looked at the tablet and glanced at Hyan's ID card, after which he said the attendance was confirmed. He pointed to the resting place and said that there was still a lot of time left so she could sit under this canopy and relax for the time being. Hyan thanked him. A moment later she heard something, then looked back. Noticing Sun Jun flew in from a long run and halted, and was surprised that she was already there. He looked around after a little while. The lagging gusts of air caught up with him. A strong wind began to blow towards the people who were standing beside the furniture. Sun Jun awkwardly adjusted the fallen chairs and apologized, saying that he ran too fast so it seemed like a shockwave arose. Hyan smiled awkwardly and thought about whether he wanted to say that the wind rose simply because of fast running too fast, after which he said he came quite early. Sun Jun looked at the gate while Hyan wondered what kind of person he was. She pointed to the gate and said she had already passed all the clearance checks, so he could let her know when he was ready to enter. The hero replied that he could start the raid right now because he didn't care. They entered the gate, finding themselves in the middle of a wheat field. They looked around. Sun Jun was surprised that they were in a field. He turned to Hyan and said that if she was in danger, she should let him know immediately. She said she was fine. She touched her chest and presented an empress's necklace, after which she said that she was wearing it and was given to her by the guild because it was an artifact that had a shield function and a weakening disability effect. Hyan looked at it and said that if she attracted the attention of monsters, she would help him to some extent, so she would try to stay as far away from the battlefield as possible. The hero walked forward, telling her now he could fight without worrying about anything. He was enveloped in tense, dark energy. The spiritual eye's skill was activated, the protagonist remembered. This was the skill he received from the Lizard King. He noticed 3 objects approaching, covered in dark energy. His spiritual eyes were locked on the enemy. He knew he felt the presence of enemies invisible to the eyes and added that this is a perfect for the use of the spiritual eyes. The enemies quickly approached him through the wheat field. Sun Jun watched as they approached very closely. He jumped into the air, dodging 3 lizard-like creatures. The beast opened its mouth looking at him. Hyen frowned in surprise seeing the poisonous creatures. She took a step forward and shouted at our hero to be careful because this violated the rules of the dungeon. Sun Jun said, "Huh, these weaklings are nothing." They made several dashes, destroying each opponent. The monsters' bodies fell one at a time next to him. Hyen's mouth opened in surprise, thinking about what she had just seen because this was simply insane. She smiled happily and noted that she had always known she had made the right decision to begin with. Sun Jun continued fighting. The creatures were running out of the portal. He cut one in half, making a dash to the second one. His sword began to emit a golden light. Our hero looked away and thought the appearance of the lightning effect was so rare that he had completely forgotten about its existence. One of the monsters was quickly approaching him from behind. The protagonist dodged at the last moment, noticing the clenched jaws of the enemy. He grabbed the creature by the tail, swinging it. He sent the monster to the ground. Sun Jun slammed the lizard's body to the ground. Standing up, he looked in the distance, then waved his hand to Hyen and said that he had cleared the area nearby so she could calmly approach. Hyen opened her mouth with beads of sweat that he had reached the gate leading to the boss room in less than an hour and by himself at that. But the most surprising thing was they were now in a dungeon that violated all the rules. She remembered the appearance of the monster and thought that the poisonous fissure was a monster that should not be taken lightly. She looked at the corpses of the monsters and added one of the monsters recommended for group attacks, even for those same C-rank hunters, in order to kill in party play. So she still can't believe that he dealt with such monsters so playfully, as if there was a helpless baby standing in front of him. She looked at Sun Jun's back facing the red gate and said that this was far from his growth potential. While Sun Jun was facing the Scarlet Gate, Hyen added that it was impossible to even imagine how he would progress in the future. Sun Jun began to collect the souls of the enemies he killed, increasing his stats, lowering his head while the souls formed near his chest, and thought that with this level, even the boss would not pose much of a threat to him. Looking towards the Scarlet Gate, he said that they would go to the boss's room after all. Stepping inside, they found themselves in a dark and foggy cavern. A slight green light was breaking through the gap between the rocks. Hyen said, "This is a little strange." A magic projectile was approaching them from above at high speeds, while they were talking about how they had already gone far, but the presence of the monster was still not felt. Suddenly they raised their heads, noticing the danger. Sun Jun frowned nervously. The monster struck. Sun Jun thought that it was very dangerous. He grabbed Hyen out from under the monster's attack and ran away. Hyen looked at his face in surprise. The beast opened its mouth and began to collect mana, then released a powerful beam of energy. Hyen pointed her finger at the energy beam and told Sun Jun looking in that direction. Suddenly, a powerful explosion emitted from the spot. Sun Jun, along with Hyen, jumped out of the smoke. Sun Jun stepped onto the stone floor. He crouched down and said that he had moved her here away from danger because the monster looked extremely powerful. So he hoped for her understanding. Hyen got off his hands and said that it was the other way around because now she is indebted to him. They looked at the monster that was searching for them. Sun Jun said that he would leave her so he could deal with the beast. Hyen turned around worriedly and asked him to stop so she could use the enhancement skill on him because they could test his personal skills later. He stepped into the abyss and said that he would not agree to that. Frowning slightly, he also added that he would be back soon. Our hero jumped down like a soldier. He landed right in front of the beast, shattering the stone floor. The monster opened its mouth and bared its teeth. Sun Jun ducked down, glaring, and activated instant acceleration. The beast planted its foot on the concrete. Sun Jun also used the exclusive effect of the speed boots. Preparing for battle, the beast once again accumulated energy in its mouth. Our hero raised all speed by 70%. He dashed forward from his place and went on the attack, having run past the monster's face. He did not even look back. The beast turned its head towards him. Our hero used 3 laceration skill and began to strike, cutting the flesh of the beast. Several body parts began to fall to the ground next to it. Heian watched what was happening from the root of a tree. The system announced the victory over the dungeon boss and said that in 3 hours the dungeon would be sealed. Heian smiled and laughed nervously. Looking at our hero, she said that now she was completely confused about who was the monster to begin with. They headed towards the Scarlet Gate. They exited the Scarlet Gate and went out into the wheat field. Heian said that she never expected that he, being a C-rank hunter, would clear the dungeon so quickly. She folded her hands behind her back and added that he passed the test and could now use the White Guild's dungeon because their guild was not so stupid as to miss out on a talent like him. Sunjun replied that he was pleased to hear it. Heian turned around and said that she would digress a little from the main topic of the conversation. She presented 3 levels of difficulty and said that when he was summoned to the tower in a trial, the difficulty he initially chose did not matter much because even at low difficulty, those who showed good progress in passing the trials would face increasingly difficult tasks. As the number of trials increased, she schematically presented the exchange of difficulty between high and low levels, after which she added that there was also a reverse process, because even at a higher difficulty, if the results were not good, the applicant could gradually slide down to low difficulty. She looked to the side and said that based on this, the fact that he had achieved such an amazing growth could only mean one thing. His difficulty level in climbing to the top of the tower surpassed all expectations. The 3 past trials flashed through Sunjun's memories. Heian finished the sentence by saying that his level was deadly among the top 50 participants on the summary board. She lowered her head and said therefore she hoped he would try to be a little more careful next time. Sunjun was very surprised to hear her say that she would like to accompany him for as long as possible, or to mature his awesome growth with her own eyes. Sunjun was sitting on the rooftop of a building in the middle of the night. He took a bite of an apple, showing his teeth. He said that for the past 3 days, he had really been spinning like a squirrel in a wheel.